Hi, welcome to Lesson 8 of Chef's Apprentice, Learning to Cook Like a Pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is Asian Flanken cut beef short ribs. This easy beef dish introduces a little used cut of beef called Flanken cut short ribs, which are cut across the bone, not along it. The beauty of this cut is that it yields thin, easy to eat, meaty pieces of beef. You'll also start to learn about Asian ingredients, specifically mirin from Japan and Shao Xing from China. These are both sweet cooking wines. Their alcohol or acid is perfect for marinades. This dish also shows you how to tenderize tougher cuts of meat, like beef short ribs, by cooking them low and slow. Techniques today are chopping, making a marinade, marinating beef, seasoning, cooking low and slow, bringing to a boil, reducing, searing, garnishing, and adjusting seasoning. So let's start cooking. Okay, so here we are at the board for Lesson 8, Asian Flanken cut beef short ribs. We'll start with our mise en place. First, the ingredients. Now, we have here about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds. I think this is about 1.7 or so pounds of beef short ribs, and they've been flanken cut. And flanken cut means that they've been cut across the bone. Now, when you see beef short ribs, or if you see pork spare ribs or pork baby back ribs, you see a long bone, and there's some meat in between them and fat. With flanken cut, instead of leaving you that long bone, we're cutting across the bone. So if we were to take all of these and put them back together, it would look like the short ribs that you're used to seeing, or would look like these spare ribs that you're used to seeing. But they've been cut across the bone. Now, so that's called flanken cut. If you have them cut for you by a butcher, ask them to be about 1/2 inch thick flanken cut. Now you see there's a bone here, a bone here, and a bone here. They've basically cut, if you had a long bone, you would have had 3 long bones here, and the meat attached to them. They've left 3 pieces of bone together. We could cut these further between each bone, and we may do that later on when we plate them. But you could serve this as a piece like this, or you could cut them into individual pieces. Now, I have seen flanken cut beef short ribs at Costco from time to time, so you can get them there, may be able to get them there without having to have them special cut. Also, difference between short ribs and spare ribs. Short ribs are beef. Spare ribs are pork. Baby back ribs are pork. Short ribs are beef. It's a tougher cut. It needs to be cooked low and slow so that it breaks down the tissue and makes it more tender. Okay, now let me just rinse my hands. Now, then we need the ingredients for the marinade. And we're going to use a chili sauce. Now, you can use, you can use either one of these sauces. You could find other chili sauces as well. This is Sriracha, which is a chili sauce that actually most people think it's Thai from Thailand, but it was actually invented in California. And so that's Sriracha, which you see a lot these days in a lot of different preparations in restaurants. Also, you can use this Korean style hot sauce called Gochujang. And this is the Whole Foods 365 brand. You can find it in different brands in different places. Today we are going to use the Gochujang instead of the Sriracha. You could use either one. You also need Shao Xing. Now, this is the Chinese cooking wine that I mentioned in the introduction. This is a sweet cooking wine. I've seen this at Whole Foods. I've seen it in other grocery stores. And you can also, of course, find it online. Shao Xing. Sometimes it's spelled S-H-A-O X-I-N-G rather than S-H-I-N-G. Shao Xing or Shao Xing. The X being pronounced like a Z. Okay, so that's Shao Xing. Also, we need mirin. Now, mirin is a Japanese sweet cooking wine. Now, there are brands of this. There's a Kikkoman brand available in most stores. I like this Mitoku brand. I think this is the best brand. It's made by a company called Natural Import Company, or it's imported and bottled by Natural Import Company. And the thing I like about this is no high fructose corn syrup. Now, this I've only found online. Mitoku, M-I-T-O-K-U. Organic Mikawa, M-I-K-A-W-A, mirin. This says sweet rice seasoning, but if you just search for mirin, you'll find it under Natural Import Company. You can use other brands, but most of the other brands that I've found in the United States have high fructose corn syrup. This one does not. We will also need some honey. You could use any brand of honey. We'll also need soy sauce. Now, soy sauce, I also like the Mitoku brand that's brought into the country by Natural Import Company. I buy a lot of this. The Japanese word for soy sauce is shoyu, S-H-O-Y-U. So I will often say shoyu, just because it's a habit. But it's soy sauce. But it doesn't have to be this soy sauce. You can also use the Kikkoman brand. This happens to be the lower sodium soy sauce, but it doesn't have to be low sodium for this or any other dish. We are going to use the Kikkoman for this dish because it's a marinade, and this is a less expensive soy sauce. This is a more expensive soy sauce, and so since it's just a marinade, it's going to get tossed after we do the marinating. We're going to use the less expensive soy sauce for that. We also need sesame oil, and you can either use regular sesame oil or hot sesame oil if you want a little bit more spice. For this dish, for my marinade, I'm going to use the regular sesame oil. We'll also need some garlic. Now, in prior lessons, we have taken the cloves off the garlic. We've just crushed them lightly with the side of the knife. The peel comes right off, and then we've chopped the garlic. But we don't have to start with this whole head of garlic. We can use garlic that's already been peeled. This particular brand, Christopher Ranch, is sold at Whole Foods, and it's already peeled. And what I like about this is that it comes in these little, this one's already open, but it comes in these little vacuum sealed pouches. So even though you have, maybe 5 or 6 pouches inside this bag, they don't start to, they stay in pretty good condition because they're vacuum sealed, and you only have open the one that you are using. And the cloves generally are pretty big and really nice looking cloves. There's a little blemish on the side of this one that we'll cut off later. So for this preparation, we're going to use the just pre-peeled garlic. We'll also need ginger. Now you can use a fresh nub of ginger, but I stopped buying fresh ginger a long time ago because my friend Mary, who is unfortunately no longer with us, told me about this great technique of taking a container like this. This is from the Talenti, T-A-L-E-N-T-I, gelato. Great gelato, even better containers because they screw on, they're made of plastic, this top screw on and off. So what she taught me to do is to take ginger and put it in one of these containers and fill up the container with either sake, this one has Japanese sake in it, or sherry. And just put the pieces of ginger in there and put on the top and put it in the refrigerator, and they last forever. Fresh ginger doesn't last forever. It also starts to get dried out and shriveled up over time. But if you put the ginger into the sake or the... Well, my camera just clicked off in the middle of my sentence. If you put the ginger into the sake or the sherry, it will keep for a long time in the refrigerator. We'll also need ginger ale, and this is Canada Dry ginger ale. Just happens to be, it doesn't have to be this brand. I also had some ginger beer in the refrigerator. Ginger beer doesn't have any alcohol, but, or at least I don't think it has. If it has any, it's a tiny bit. This doesn't say anything about having alcohol. And the difference between ginger ale and ginger beer is that the ginger beer is more gingery, And so we're going to use one of these two for the marinade when we make the marinade. We'll also need some parsley. We chopped some parsley just yesterday for something else. I'm going to use the pre-chopped parsley. You've seen in prior lessons how to chop parsley. We'll probably do it in other lessons as well, but we're going to use this parsley that's already been chopped. And you don't have to use parsley for this dish. You could use chopped chives instead of parsley. You could use chopped cilantro. You could use chopped scallions. You could use one or two of them. It doesn't have to be just one. Make your own decisions. We are going to use parsley, and we're going to chop up some scallions. We'll also need some kosher salt. As always, this is Morton's kosher salt. We will need our Peppermill, as always. So now we're going to break, and I will come back and show you the equipment that we'll need for this lesson. Okay, we're back at the board. We're going to go over our equipment that we need for lesson 8. Of course, we're going to need cutting board. We're going to need chef's knife. This is a Wusthof knife, which is what I normally use. We'll also need a bowl and a spoon to mix the marinade. We will need a Ziploc bag for marinating the ribs overnight. And I'm going to use my Jokari device here for helping me to fill the bag. We will need a pan to put in the oven with water in it. It doesn't have to be this big. And then we'll need another pan to put and we'll also need a pan to put the bag in. So once we put the ribs in the bag, we're going to put them into a pan overnight. In case the bag leaks, we'll put them in a pan. That same bag could be used as the water pan in the oven tomorrow. And also, we will need a pan to put the ribs in, to cook them. We'll also need a brush to brush the ribs. We're going to need some foil to cover the pan. I'm going to introduce you to what I call my portfolio. I reuse foil. It is one of my ways of reducing waste and also reducing my carbon footprint where I can. And so we have all different sized pieces of foil in here that have been used on prior occasions and then cleaned afterwards. It's very easy to clean off foil, by the way. Just wipe it with a sponge and rinse it off. And so we'll pick out an appropriate piece of foil tomorrow to cover the pan of ribs when we need it. We'll also need a saucepan for purposes of reducing the pan juices and the remaining marinade. We will need a frying pan because after we cook the ribs low and slow in the oven, we're going to sear them in the frying pan just before we serve them. And we will need a plate, of course, to plate the ribs when we're ready to serve them. They're Asian, so I'm using this kind of Asian style plate, but obviously use whatever plate you have. And we'll also need a dish for a dipping sauce. This is a dipping sauce dish. And again, you might ask, well, I don't have that kind of stuff. Remember, this is how to learn cook like a pro. Okay, so we're learning to cook like a pro. And this is the type of dish you would get in a restaurant. Of course, we'll need a sizzle plate. Right now I have the short ribs on the sizzle plate. We will need that later for purposes of warming or keeping the ribs warm while we are reducing the juices. And if you haven't noticed by now, sizzle plates are invaluable. I use them all the time. And these are from JB Prince. Let's see. We'll also need a timer. And since we're going to be using long times, we're going to be cooking the ribs for a total of 6 hours, I'm going to use the timer on my smartphone as the timer for this lesson. So that's all of the equipment. Now we're going to break, and we will be back so we can start cooking. Okay, we are back at the board. We have our prep list, and I've prioritized them in 3 ways this time because we're going to be doing marinating overnight. So I have 2 asterisks, 2 stars next to the things that need to be done on the first day. And then I have 1 star next to the things that have to be done early or at the beginning on the second day. And then I have dashes for the things that need to be done next after that. And then the rest of the things are cooking and assembling. So first thing on the list is to prep the ribs, and in this case it really just means get them, if they've come in some kind of a cryovac package or they're wrapped up, really it just means get them out of the package, get them ready, have them handy so that they can be put into the marinade. Next thing on our list is to chop the garlic, and we are going to use this pre-peeled garlic. How much garlic? Okay, so I like a lot of garlic. I don't think you can ever have too much garlic. And in my opinion, this is not enough garlic for all of that beef. So I'm going to open another one of these packages, these, which are, as I mentioned earlier, they are vacuum sealed, so the garlic stays fresher longer in these packages. And I think that this is a good amount of garlic for this amount of beef. Okay, so we're going to cut off the root end of each piece of garlic. That's the hard nubby part, kind of brown. I cut off the blemish that was on that piece of garlic that I showed you earlier, and we'll just get these off the board. Okay. Then, remember, keep your fingers curled under, thumb behind, slide the knife along your fingers so it's very difficult to cut yourself. Okay. Find a flat piece of the garlic and lay it on the board. Some people will cut the garlic in half and then they'll lay the flat piece on the board like this. Lay the flat side on the board and then cut it. It rocks less, it's more stable. It's also probably safer, less likely to cut yourself. I often don't do that because I've just been doing this a lot. If you're just starting out, it's probably easier if you cut the garlic first and then lay the flat side on your board and then slice it. And all right, so we got a good amount of garlic there. Okay. We're going to just chop all that garlic into a coarse chop. Now, why do you chop things? Well, partly it's because of texture, and partly you don't want something, maybe a big piece of something in your dish. But the other reason is that the more surface area you expose of whatever the ingredient is, the more the flavor of that surface can get into whatever it is that you're cooking. And so cherry tomatoes are a great example. You could put a whole cherry tomato in something, and they're small anyway, so you could think, oh, that's bite size or smaller than bite size, so why do I need to slice it up? Well, for one thing, when you bite into it, or if you try to pick it up with your fork, it might squirt juices everywhere. But if you slice it, you're also exposing the surface area of each one of those slices to whatever they're in. So it helps the flavor. Also, you get the flavor more when you eat them. Okay, so we've got our garlic here. A lot of garlic, but it's a marinade, so it'll help to infuse the flavor and the aroma of the garlic into the ribs in the marinade overnight. Okay, so we just have the garlic in our bowl. clean the side of the knife on the side of the bowl, get the extra garlic off. Okay, now, so first things on our list were to prep the ribs, chop the garlic. Now we need to chop the ginger. And now the ginger, this ginger is not peeled. For some preparations, it's a good idea to, it's best to peel it. For this preparation, it's not really necessary because it's just a, it's a marinade. This piece, however, actually has already been peeled, and we're going to use it. Now how much? Well, ginger's pretty powerful. I think that's enough ginger for this amount of beef. Okay? So we are going to, first I sliced it in half, put the flat side on the board. You can usually find a flat side or almost flat side on garlic, so I don't always cut it in half. But there is no flat side on a piece of ginger, so cut it in half, put it on the board, sliced it, slice the other piece, chop it up into a coarse chop. And put that into our bowl. Okay, next we have, according to our prep list, we have chopped the ginger. And now we need to mix the marinade. Okay, so we're going to start with this, we're using this Korean Gochujang chili sauce. I want to shake it up. I always shake up any chili sauce. And now, we're going to kind of measure and kind of not measure, okay? We're going to use a regular tablespoon because I don't want you to get dependent on using measuring spoons, okay? So this is really more a matter of proportions. We want to use about 6 parts of this to about 2 parts of the Shao Xing and the mirin to 1 part of everything else. So that could be, now the part could be a tablespoon, could be a teaspoon, it could be that you're using a small container, or it could be that maybe you're using a 1/4 cup measuring cup. It just depends on how much you need, depends on how much beef you have. For this much beef, I figure that we are going to need we're going to start with 6 to 2 to 1 to 1. Okay, so for the chili sauce, we're going to use about 6. We're going to use this is a soup spoon, okay, so it's not an official tablespoon, so we're going to use about 6 of these. Three, 4, 5, 6. Now you see I didn't level them or anything. It's up above the rim of the spoon, so it's not exactly 6 tablespoons. It's not exactly 6 soup spoons, but it's roughly 6 of the measurement that I'm using. Okay. Then we're going to need some Shao Xing. Okay, so we're going to use we're going to use 2 parts of the Shao Xing. You see I'm overflowing the spoon a little bit. It's okay. It's not rocket science. It's not, doesn't have to be precise. Think about it. If you use a little bit more, a little bit of less of one of these ingredients in the marinade, are you going to be able to taste it in the end result? No. It's just going to have maybe no effect, and if at all, a very subtle effect on your end result. All right, mirin. We're going to use 2 parts of mirin. Now I'm being more careful with this stuff because it's more expensive and I don't want to use any more than I have to. Then we're going to use 1 part of honey. Okay, that was a nice generous part. 1 part of shoyu or soy sauce. Again, I prefer Japanese soy sauce over soy sauces that are made anywhere else. 1 part of soy sauce, and 1 part of sesame oil. Okay. Then we're going to mix it up. Look how good that looks. All that garlic in there and all that chopped ginger, the beautiful color of the gochujang, and I'll tell you, it smells great too. Someday we'll be able to put smell into a video, and people can share in that as well. Although it might not always be a good thing. Okay, so we've got our marinade mixed up. Now, let's check our prep list. And we mixed the marinade. All right, now we're going to take our filling bag, or our bag filler, I should say, and put our bag on there. I also reuse Ziploc bags too. I clean them out, put them in the dishwasher. Again, my way of reducing waste and reducing my carbon footprint a little bit. I used to just use these once and throw them away, and I thought it just seems so wasteful. Okay, so now we're going to put the beef into the bag. All right, then we're going to put the marinade into the bag. Now I'll sometimes use a rubber spatula to get as much out of the bowl as I possibly can, but I've done a pretty good job with the wooden spoon here. However, if you are making a sauce and you have to divide it among, say, 6 or 8 people, you definitely want to use a rubber spatula like this. Rubber spatula like this to get everything out of the bowl, because you could have a full serving if you're dividing dividing something you've made among various dishes, maybe 8 separate small plates. You might be able to get a full serving out of the bowl by scraping it. So it's important not to waste, because you may not have enough otherwise. Okay, so then you want to try to get the air out of the bag, and the reason for that is that it makes it easier to mix things around inside the bag. We just want to mix it up as much as we can. Try to get that marinade coating and covering all of the beef that's inside. If there was a lot of air in this bag, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now. I've got the bag is right down on top of the beef. And just mix it around as much as I can. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to put that into pan to marinate overnight. Now this all fits down in here nice and flat. There are no pieces on top, over top of other pieces, so the marinade, so they're not in the marinade. Everything is in the marinade. If we had more in here where, you know, they were kind of stacked, since the marinade is on the bottom and there are pieces that aren't really in the marinade, then I would tell you to turn this every now and then. We're doing this overnight, so I might say to turn it, you know, right before you go to bed, and then turn it again in the morning, and then, but we don't need to do that with this particular batch. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to marinate that overnight in the refrigerator. Now I want to tell you what's coming up next. Tomorrow we are going to cook these ribs, and they're going to cook for 6 hours. Now, my wife Sarah and I, we normally eat at about 8 o'clock in the evening. And for that, to do that, that means that we need to start around 1 p.m. in order to be able to do everything that we need to do. We're going to bring the ribs to room temperature. We're going to preheat the oven, and we're going to start that at 1 o'clock. At 1:30 then we are going to start cooking for 4 hours till 5:30. And then we're going to do another step that's on the prep list, and then we're going to cook them for 2 more hours. That'll bring us to 7:30. And then we'll let them rest for a little while, and then serve them around 8 o'clock. If you eat earlier, then you need to start earlier. But we eat at 8, so we're starting at 1 p.m. So basically, we're starting 7 hours earlier than you want to eat. Now, don't let the fact that this is taking time seem like it's not an easy dish. What we did was easy. What we just did was easy, and the next steps are going to be easy. So this is still an easy dish. It's just that it takes longer because we're learning to cook low and slow. So we're going to break now, and we're going to come back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the next steps on the prep list. Okay, here we are at the board. It is 1:30, the day after we prepared the ribs for marinating. And according to our prep list, we needed to heat the oven at 1 p.m. I've already done that. You could also use a smoker for this. You don't have to use an oven. You could use a smoker with or without the smoke. I have an electric smoker, so you can set the temperature to exactly 200 degrees, and it maintains that temperature. And if you add the smoke, you add wood chips, and they create the smoke. So you could either smoke these ribs, or you can just roast them in the oven. But preheat your oven to 200 degrees. And then we're going to place a water pan in the oven. So I have a pan here, which I've filled about 3/4 of the way with water. We're going to put this in the oven below where the ribs are going to be. Now, why do we do that? We do that to keep the air inside of the oven moister. The oven is indirect enveloping heat, but it's very dry. And we want to try to avoid drying out the ribs, so we put a pan of water in there so the water can evaporate and create a more humid environment. Okay, so we placed that in there. Now, and also the ribs had to come to room temperature at 1 p.m. We did that. I gave them about a half an hour to come to room temperature. You could give them half hour to 45 minutes. Now, we need to season the ribs. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil into the bottom of this pan in which we're going to roast the ribs. And the reason I'm doing that is not really so much for the recipe, but to make the pan easier to clean later. You might say, well, why don't you just line it with foil? Well, I think that's a little wasteful, so I don't do it. I'd rather clean the pan. And so if you brush your pan with some olive oil, then it'll make it easier to clean later on. There we go. All right. Now, we're going to take the ribs out of the marinade, and we're going to use a pair of tongs to do it so that I don't contaminate my fingers. Just going to lay them out in the pan here. Remember, this was about 1.5 pounds of ribs. And the last one. Boy, I gotta tell you, they smell great. They smell great. So we just want to do a little bit of repositioning to try to get them in there nice and flat. Good, that's good. Perfect. Now, we're going to season the ribs. We're going to season them on the top and the bottom with kosher salt. So I'm doing like a medium seasoning, and pepper. Turn them over.
nice and placed in there again. And we're going to season this side. It's about the same amount. Kosher salt and freshly ground pepper. Okay, check our prep list, season the ribs. Next thing on the list is to cook them uncovered for 4 hours. So I'm going to put them into the oven now. And we will come back in 4 hours, which will be 5:30 p.m. I'm going to set timer on my smartphone for 4 hours. And I'll see you at 5:30. So it's actually not 5:30 yet, but one thing I wanted to mention is save this marinade. I'm just going to leave it in the bag for now and put it back in the fridge. But later on, we're going to put it into a saucepan with the pan juices and reduce them to make a dipping sauce. Just hold on to your extra marinade, and I'll see you at 5:30. Okay, so it's been 4 hours. The ribs have been cooking at 200 degrees for 4 hours, so we've cooked them uncovered for 4 hours. Next step is to brush the ribs with the pan sauce. So we're going to take them out of the oven. Oh, they are looking good. They are looking good. All right, so we're going to take our brush. We're just going to reach down in here and get some of this pan sauce. Now this pan sauce is mostly, as I can see, it's mostly fat that has rendered from the ribs. But that can't be bad in terms of taste. Fat always adds taste. Now, fat also can be good for you or bad for you depending on what kind it is. But fat always adds taste. If you choose to remove fat, you choose to remove taste. But that's your choice. You can cook however you want. In this course, you'll learn how to build the most flavor. That often means using fat. But you can choose to use less in your own cooking. And we're going to turn these over to see what they look like. You can see they're totally different on the bottom because they haven't had the exposure to the heat. All right, so now, next step, according to the prep list, is to add the ginger ale. And I noticed, I realized that this Canada Dry ginger ale I had was diet. We don't want diet because it doesn't have any sugar in it. So we're going to use this ginger beer instead, and this will have a much more of a zip of ginger. In fact, it says right there on the can, the refreshing zip of ginger. That will have more of a gingery taste than the Canada Dry. So I'm using about, I'd say it's about half the can. I just wanted to have enough basically to cover the ribs, or just not even to cover them, just almost up to the top of the ribs. You can see by looking at it that they're not covered. They're submerged in the mixture of the pan sauce and the ginger ale, but they're not totally covered. Okay, so now what we want to do is cover them. I've taken a piece of foil out of my portfolio that I thought would fit. This piece does fit. We're going to cover it. And we're going to check our prep list. So we brushed the ribs with the pan sauce. We added the ginger ale. We're going to cover them and cook for 2 hours. Okay, so I'm going to put them back into the oven. Same heat. Okay, so they're back in the oven. They're going to cook covered for 2 hours. It is now 5:30. I'm going to break for a minute, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to do the chopping of the parsley and the scallions, which we'll need for garnishing at the end. So we'll be back in just a moment to do that, but the ribs are going to be in the oven at 200 degrees for 2 more hours covered. Okay, so we're going to prepare our garnish for when these Flanken cut short ribs are finished. And during the prep yesterday, I said that I was going to use some parsley that I'd already chopped, but I don't really like the way that it's looking, and it doesn't smell as fresh as it should. It doesn't actually smell like parsley. So we are going to re-chop some fresh parsley, and this whole bunch has already been washed and dried. We're going to get rid of the big pieces of stems, and we'll just chop that much there. So the more experience you get with chopping, the faster you'll get. And again, we just want to have a nice coarse chop of this parsley. You can see how I bring it together, chop across it by holding my fingers on the end of the knife and rocking it, moving it through, rocking it as I pivot it this way. Okay. Okay, that looks good. I'll put that into a prep bowl in a minute. Then we are going to prep our scallions. For scallions, these have already also been washed and dried. And you want to cut off the root end in a square cut right across the root, just like that. Then what I like to do is I like to give it a little bit of an angle cut. I think it makes it look better. So I put them down on the board slightly separated like this, so that when the knife is put up against their edges, it is at about a 45-degree angle. And then I start slicing on the diagonal. Now these are just going to be a garnish. They are going to be sprinkled over the ribs, and the ribs are going to be plated up individually for each guest. So we just need to have enough that we can garnish. I think this is for you can make 8 plates with this amount of ribs, 8 small plates, or probably serve 4 people as main course, since it would also have a veg and a starch with it. I've said that before, veg and a starch. I refer to all vegetables together as a group as veg, and I refer to anything that's starchy like potatoes or rice, or even something like a butternut squash or an acorn squash. I refer to all of those as a starch. A sweet potato, all of them are as a starch. And so, you know, traditionally the way a meal is made is with a veg and a starch and a protein being the meat. Since we're doing small plates, we're not always doing it that way. But sometimes when I talk about how these preparations could be used, if they were main course, I'll tell you, about what the proportions would be for serving if they were going to be served with a veg and a starch. So we have chopped our parsley and our scallion. Those are ready to go. I'm going to put them in prep bowls and put them in the fridge so they stay fresh. And then we'll come back at 7:30 to do the next step with the ribs. Okay, it's 7:30. The ribs have been cooking 2 hours covered. We're going to take them out for the next step. Okay, let's see what they look like. Ooh, beautiful. Look at that beautiful brown lacquered finish. Okay. Now, we want to take them out of the pan. We're going to put them on a sizzle plate. And we're going to put them in, I can feel that they're fall apart tender. We're going to put them in a warm place, covered. We're going to use the same foil that was in, we used to have them in the oven. Good. Now I'm going to put them in the warming oven. You could even put them back into the 200-degree oven because, in fact, what I did is I turned the 200-degree oven down to 150 for warming, and you could do the same thing. Or you could use, you could just leave them in the 200 degrees too, because they've been cooking for, what, 6 hours at 200 degrees? Another few minutes isn't going to make any difference. Okay, now next we need to add the remaining marinade to the pan sauce. And the pan sauce is a bit fatty because, let's see, this pan is just cool enough to touch. It's a bit fatty because the fat from the ribs rendered into the pan. And what I'm going to try to do is remove some of that fat with this device, which causes the fat automatically rises to the top, and then we have the essence down below, and then it has a spout that pours off from the bottom. So we're going to try to get some of that fat out of there by using this device. This is an OXO device. I guess it's called a fat separator. I'm not really sure what they call it. We're going to try to pour. You know what I should have done? I should have strained it first, because it has the spout doesn't, the spout can clog. So we're going to pour it through the strainer that comes with the device. That's going to catch that chopped garlic and ginger. Then we'll take the strainer out. Now we're going to try to pour the essence through this device, leaving most of the fat in this fat separating device. I'll find out what OXO actually calls this thing and put that into the description and the list of equipment needed for this lesson in the description part of the video. Okay, so we got most of the essence out of the bottom. You can see that we've got a little bit of essence down in the bottom, and the rest of this is fat. So we managed to separate most of the fat. And now what we're going to do is add the remaining marinade to this. Good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move to the stove, and we are going to bring this to a boil and reduce it. So we're going to break for a moment and meet you back at the stove. Okay, we are at the stove, and we're going to do two things now. We're going to add some heat here. The stove doesn't want to light. There we go. All right. Want a pretty high heat, medium-high heat. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring this to a boil, and then we're going to reduce it. Now, bring to a boil is kind of a technical term. It doesn't mean just boil something. It means bring it to a boil and then reduce the heat. This can be very important in some preparations, like making stock, for example. If you bring stock to a rolling boil, the fat will go into what's called an emulsion, basically suspended in the liquid of the stock, which is water, and it'll be very difficult to get it out. And
and so what we want to do here is we want to just bring this to a boil, and as soon as it's come to a boil, one, we don't want it to go to a rolling boil because it will bubble up and overflow this saucepan. But as soon as it gets to a boil, we want to reduce the heat just so that it doesn't overflow, and so we can then reduce it. Now, reduce it means to basically to cause water that's in the sauce, or this is a that timer's for something else. Let me just break for a second, and I'll be right back. Okay, so we're off camera for just about a minute and a half, and you can see this is coming to a boil. If something's starting to boil and it's starting to come up the side of the pot like it's going to overflow, just lift it up. That reduces the heat. And then reduce your heat on the stove, put it back down. And what we want to do is we want to have this bubbling, and we want steam to be coming off of it. That means that it's reducing. And it's reducing in volume. And what reducing does is reduces the volume of whatever the liquid happens to be, but it also concentrates the flavors, makes it more having a more intensified concentrated flavor. Keep in mind though that it also will concentrate salt, so if you have something that is kind of salty to begin with, it could get too salty when you reduce it. I don't think we have that problem with this, however, because although we had some salt in the seasoning, and there was some salt in some of the marinating ingredients like the soy sauce to show you, we also put in like a half a can of ginger ale, so that would have diluted it to some extent as well. So we're going to just let it reduce. We want to reduce it by about, I'd say, roughly half of its volume. And then once we've reduced it by about half of its volume, we will have something that we can use as a glaze. We're going to brush it onto the ribs, and we're also going to use it as a dipping sauce with the meal, with the ribs when we serve them. Now you can see in real time this is taking, it's going to take probably about 5 to 7 minutes to reduce this by roughly half. It depends on the heat that you have. It's going to depend on how much liquid you have, how much heat you have, how powerful your stove is, and the size of the saucepan. A lot of variables, but you just keep an eye on it. Okay, we're going to let this cook off camera for a minute or two, and I'll tell you how long it took when we come back. Okay, we're back at the stove. We've reduced it by about half. It looks good. We're going to turn the heat off and check our prep list. We have combined the pan juices and the marinade, and we have brought them to a boil, and we've reduced them. Now we're going to brush the ribs. So, take the ribs out of the warming oven, and let's move the sauce to the back burner. Take foil off. We're going to get this pan. Now we're going to sear these ribs. Now, searing is to cook something on a relatively high heat for purposes of basically sealing the outside. Here, it's going to be mostly for show, for color. We're going to use a high smoke point oil. Specifically, I'm using avocado oil now. And we're bringing this frying pan to a cranky and hot in fact, let's switch positions here. to get this pan hot, almost smoking hot, and then we're going to sear these ribs. Now let's brush them with our glaze. Now remember, there's honey. There's honey in this glaze. So anytime you have sugar, and also there's sugar from the ginger ale. Anytime you have sugar, that's going to help you to get a nice color on whatever it is that you're searing. I'm going to brush both sides of each one of these while the pan is getting hot. Okay, last one. All right, now the remainder of this glaze, we're going to move that over to the plating area. We're going to use that as a dipping sauce. Our pan, remember, you don't need as much oil as you think you do, because as the oil gets hot, it gets thinner, and therefore it can spread across the pan. I told you that I would tell you how long it took to reduce that glaze. I was off camera for about a minute and a half. So it went from the full volume down to about half the volume in the time that we were on camera, and then a minute and a half that we were off, which I think was about 5 minutes altogether. But again, it depends on your heat. Alright, we still need to get this a little hotter. I'm going to turn the heat up just a little bit. Check the prep list. In the meantime, we have brushed our ribs. We are now about to sear them. Now, another thing that we could have done, instead of using the avocado oil, which is a high smoke point oil, is we could have just used some of the oil that's still on the sizzle plate here from the ribs themselves. Use their own oil. Now I can see that there are whiffs of smoke coming off of the frying pan, and the oil is now beating up a little bit, which means that it's pretty hot. So we are going to start with the side that was pan side down in when we had the ribs in the oven for 6 hours, and we're going to do these in batches. We just want to get a sear, let's say probably 30 seconds to a minute. Now you're going to have to learn to judge this. It depends on how hot your frying pan is, and it depends on also how much oil you use. You don't want to use too much oil, because then you'll be deep frying them. Okay, we don't want to deep fry them. We want to have just enough oil that it will coat the bottom of the ribs when you put them in the pan, and so that we then get a little sear going. So look how beautiful they are. They started out looking like this. They didn't have much color, and now it has a nice color on that side, on the bottom side. Okay, let's turn them over. Do the same thing on this side. That only took, what, less than a minute. Oh, okay, good. Look at that. Okay, that's all it took. About, let's say, that 30 to 45 seconds on each side.
Start with the side that was on the bottom of the pan. This one is so fall apart tender that it's falling apart. I'm going to add a little bit of oil from this pan. Part of what was in this sizzle plate was oil, and part of it was essence. The essence will steam and evaporate immediately. The oil will not. It will just heat up. Okay. This looks great. Okay, we're going to turn these over. Let them go for about 30 seconds. Okay, take those off. Now what we're going to do is we're going to deglaze this pan. Just put a little bit of water in there. You could use wine as well. And scrape the fond. Remember, the fond is the bits of the protein that are left in the pan after cooking something. And by deglazing, this is called deglazing, by adding water or wine or some other liquid. I use a wooden spatula to scrape anything off the bottom of the pan. That's starting to create a pan sauce. And we can reduce that just like we reduced the glaze, and we will add that to the glaze as soon as it gets reduced a bit more. You can see that there's a lot of this is like debris from the cooking. This is from like a burned glaze. So we're going to strain this before we put it into the in with the rest of the glaze. We're going to just let it reduce a little bit longer. The higher the heat, faster it reduces. Let's check our prep list. We've seared the ribs. We just have left to brush them again and plate them. Okay, so we're just going to let this reduce a little bit more. Now what we're doing here is we're gathering the flavor of the ribs from the pan and the glaze that was with them, and we are reducing that and therefore concentrating the flavors. So they will add extra flavor to the glaze. It's the same concept as I mentioned in another lesson, an Italian phrase or Italian term called insaporire. It's the layering of flavors, the building of flavors. So we're going to reduce this till we have probably about 2 tablespoons worth. Okay, I think this is looking like about 2 tablespoons worth. If you eliminate all these bubbles and all the air, there's less there than it looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break and go off camera. I'm going to set up at the board for plating. Okay, so we're back at the hot board. And by the way, this is a piece of stone. If you have granite countertops, you don't need to worry about putting something hot down on the surface. But these countertops here are Corian, so I do worry about that. So I have this stone so I can put down hot things. So what we're going to do now is take a small strainer and strain this roughly, I'd say it's about 2 tablespoons of the deglazing. And the pan still has some debris in it, but that will wash right out because of the way we deglazed it. Okay. There you go, washed right out, perfectly clean. Okay, next step. We're going to take the ribs and we are going to brush them again. Actually, we only need to brush them on the serving side this time. Now these are long. If you want, you can cut them. You may do that for plating. Okay, they look good. And we're going to take our dipping sauce dish and we're going to spoon some of the dipping sauce in there. I just tasted it. It's a little bit on the spicy side because of that Gochujang Korean chili sauce that was in the marinade. Okay, now we're ready to plate. Now, I think that I like the idea of cutting these because they're a little long. So I'm going to cut them diagonally between the bones. And we're going to arrange them artistically on the plate. And we're going to garnish with a little freshly chopped parsley and some scallions. If I can get the plastic off. There we go. Okay, that's good. All right, so there we go. That is Lesson 8, Asian Flanken cut beef short ribs. We have plated it, we've garnished it, we've prepared the dipping sauce, and we brushed them. We've done everything on the prep list. So to review, the techniques that we used in this lesson, we did some chopping of the parsley and slicing of the scallions. We made a marinade. We marinated the beef. We seasoned the beef. We cooked it low and slow, 6 hours at 200 degrees. 4 of those hours were uncovered, 2 were covered with foil. We brought the glaze or the remaining pan juices and marinade, we brought those to a boil, and then we reduced by about half. We seared the ribs. We brushed the ribs and then seared them. We deglazed the pan. Also, we defatted this glazed earlier before we seared the ribs. So we seared the ribs and then we brushed them again, and then we plated, we garnished, and now we're just going to give a little bit, just a tiny little sprinkle of salt on there, which is adjusting the seasoning, and a tiny little twist of pepper. And there we have it. Lesson 8, Asian Flanken cut beef short ribs with a dipping sauce. So I thought I'd come back on camera for a moment because we used 2 techniques in this preparation that I didn't mention at the beginning. One was defatting the glaze, and the other one was deglazing the pan. And I thought it'd be worth mentioning that this is a perfect example of
learning flexibility. If you're learning to cook like a pro, you have to be flexible. So once we got those ribs out of the oven and we saw that there was a lot of fat in the pan, we could have just left the fat in the glaze. We could have mixed it up with the extra marinade and pan juices, and we could have used it that way and served it that way. But that wouldn't have been the best way to do it. The better way to do it would have been to remove as much of the fat as we could. We didn't know that we'd have that much fat until after we cooked the ribs. So we were flexible. So we didn't talk about defatting at the beginning of the lesson, but once we got into it, that seemed like the right thing to do, so that's what we did. That's flexibility. The other thing that we did was we deglazed the pan after we cooked the ribs in it. Now, that didn't have to be done, but by doing it, we increased the flavor of the glaze. A simpler preparation would have been to just forget that and to do the glaze exactly the way that I planned and to do all the steps that I planned before I did the lesson. But once I saw all that great fond in the pan, I thought, well, let's not waste that. Let's add it to the glaze. Let's add extra flavor. Okay, let's layer that flavor. That, again, that's flexibility. So again, you didn't have to do either one of those things, but by doing it, you made the dish better and you were flexible as you went along. So that's flexibility. That's what you want to learn to cook like a pro. Thanks.